Once upon a time, in a small town on the outskirts of a forest, there was an old farmhouse with a reputation for being haunted. The locals believed that it was cursed. But were the ghost stories merely legends, or did it hold a truly terrifying secret? The town's youngsters decided to gather their courage and visit the farmhouse one night. Among them, the bravest was a young man named Alex. He told his friends that he wanted to see what was inside the farmhouse. At the end of the following month, 7 friends set out into the forest. When they arrived at the farmhouse, night had fallen rapidly, and the eerie silence surrounding them began to make them uneasy. The farmhouse was in a state of disrepair, with boards covering the windows, and the garden was overgrown with weeds. As they entered the house, an odd feeling overcame them. The interior was dusty, bearing the marks of years of abandonment. They explored the house together, and upon entering one room, they heard the sound of a door closing behind them. The door had become locked, and panic ensued. As they investigated the room, they found strange symbols and writings on the wall. The symbols were in an ancient language, and no one could decipher their meaning. In the corner of the room, there was an old mirror, but the reflection within it was unusual. Their faces were distorted, and their shadows were elongated. As hours passed, the friends had split up and were exploring different parts of the house. Alex began to feel that something was approaching in the darkness. He turned his eyes to the mirror in the corner and came face to face with his own. At that moment, he lost control of his reflection. An extending hand emerged from the shadows and seized Alex, pulling him into the mirror. When his friends returned to the room, Alex's reflection had emerged from the mirror, pulling the real Alex inside. Alex's screams echoed, and then silence returned. His friends attempted to touch the mirror to save him, but it was ice cold and refused to respond to their touch. They waited in front of the mirror for hours, but Alex never appeared again. Finally, they decided to escape from the farmhouse. When they returned to the town, they were still shaken and kept quiet about the farmhouse they had left behind. The townspeople judged them with their fears and said the farmhouse was full of ghosts. From that day on, no one in the town dared to visit that old farmhouse. Alex's gruesome fate remained as a curse in the town, and everyone tried to forget the old farmhouse in the depths of the forest. But no one knew that the shadows were still ready to take their revenge. As time passed, the townspeople thought they had forgotten, but the ill reputation of the farmhouse lingered on. Many people still told fearful stories about that enigmatic farmhouse. For the town's residents, the horrors of Alex's disappearance and the terrifying moments his friends had endured were unforgettable memories. Years later, one night, the town was rattled by thunder and lightning. A violent storm had begun. The wind howled through the town's streets. Trees were uproar. That night, the town's electricity went out, and everyone retreated to their homes. During the storm, a group of young people decided to visit the old farmhouse once again. The storm had bolstered their courage. It wasn't the first time they ventured into the darkness. But what they didn't know was, when they arrived at the farmhouse, the storm still raged on, and the wind battered the roof. However, this time the farmhouse was in an even worse condition. Windows were shattered, doors were torn apart, and the roof was full of holes. As they entered, that same unsettling feeling returned. Once again, the friends split up and entered different rooms. Initially, all was quiet, but then, just like the previous night, they discovered strange symbols covering the walls. Shadows began to seep into the room, and a few of the young people panicked and tried to leave. But the doors had closed. At that moment, a scream pierced the air. The friends rushed to the room and witnessed a horrifying sight. One of their friends had been devoured by a creature that fought with its own shadow. The shadows were creeping into the room, and the terrified friends were unable to help. One by one, the friends were consumed by the shadows. They struggled to rescue their friends, but to no avail. The shadows were feeding on the darkness within each of them. Their faces grew pale, and their bodies weakened. The storm outside continued to rage, and the once ominous farmhouse had become, in the end, The young people were devoured by the shadows one by one when the storm subsided. The farmhouse was silent once more, however. The darkness in that old farmhouse was now even more powerful. It had become a curse, fed by the fearful memories of those who had lived through it. The townspeople stopped talking about the farmhouse, and they stayed far away from that place. The old farmhouse, hidden deep in the forest, persisted as a somber reminder in the town. Nobody truly knew what lay within it or what the shadows actually were, but everyone knew that avoiding the old farmhouse in the depths of the forest was the wisest choice. The shadow's revenge still awaited, and it might awaken again one day.